Listen closely. Can you hear them? Hear the echoes of a time long since past. An era when the South's forests were home to vast, dense expanses of pine and hardwood. Hear the sounds of loggers as they busy themselves felling giant pines. Visualize the billowing black smoke rising from a puffing locomotive bound for the sawmill. Welcome to the Southern Forest Heritage Museum. This is the story of the South's forests. It's a story of America's forests. It's a journey into your imagination. Before railroads cut their way into the southern forests in the late 1800s, sawmills were mainly limited to local business. The key to manufacturing profitable lumber lay in the transportation of timber out of the virgin forests. Up until this point, teams of mules or oxen were just about the only way to move timber. If there were ever to be a timber boom in the southern forests, railroads were the key. More than 3/4 of the South's land area was in trees. Forests of pine and hardwood covering all but the sea marshes and some prairies lay waiting for the axe. Once railroads had established north-south passages into the green forest expanses, the boom began. Large-scale sawmills started springing up in towns like Longleaf, Louisiana, Warren, Arkansas, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Brewton, Alabama, and Lumberton, North Carolina. In many cases, sawmills actually named the towns they started. Setting the pace for size and production was the Great Southern Lumber Company, which completed its mill in Bogalusa, Louisiana in 1908. This mill was the first in the world built completely out of steel, and proudly boasted its ability to turn out 1 million board feet of lumber every 24 hours. Imagine one mill producing each day enough lumber to build 200 homes. Lumber production hit its stride in Louisiana between 1904 and 1913, with the all-time peak of 4.1 billion board feet being reached in 1913. The task of harvesting these towering giants can be described as Herculean. The journey from forest to finished product is a long one, involving nearly every form of labor. It starts with simple tools, an axe and a saw. Two men begin the slow process by first cutting the trees down, commonly referred to as felling the trees. After branches are removed and the tree is divided into logs, yokes of oxen or teams of mules then load the logs via wagons, which are then brought to a nearby log train. But before the trees can get to the mill, they must first be loaded on the train. Then it's off to the mill. Upon arrival at the mill, the logs are released into the mill pond for separation and selection for sawing. Then it's up the chute and into the mill. The sawyer controls the carriage, which actually carries the logs through the head saw and makes square timbers, or cants, out of the logs. The sawyer determines how the log is cut. Then the square timbers are sawed into boards. Some mills had gang saws, which cut several boards simultaneously from the squared cant. The edger removes the bark and uneven edges, and the lumber is trimmed to proper length. You might not know it, but some of these early sawmills were extremely efficient, even by today's standards. Sawdust and shavings were used as fuel in the powerhouse. At the planer mill, the rough lumber is made into smooth boards. It's then shipped or stored for delivery. It's easy to see how timber products harvested from the South's forests were used to build vitally needed things like homes, schools, and churches in our area, and they still are. For instance, timber harvested right here in Louisiana also played a large role in the building of such faraway cities as St. Louis, Kansas City, and Chicago. But back in a sawmill town, life wasn't all work and no play. Sawmill owners knew that the success of a growing company depended on a stable and content workforce. Social and civic activities centered around the local churches and schools. The company store was the popular place to gather. There, patrons could shop for groceries, browse through the latest fashions, or simply relax with a cold drink at the cafe. In addition to the general store, companies also sponsored boys and girls sports. Some sawmill towns even had swimming pools, movie houses, and libraries. We are lucky to have such a healthy, vibrant, renewable resource. But it wasn't just good fortune that allowed us to continue. In the frenzy to cut timber in the early 20th century, few people thought about renewing the forest. After all, America was hungry for growth, and lumber was the building block. As a result, much of the South was left with large, clear-cut plains where dense forests once stood. With the help of visionary lumberman Henry Hartner, reforestation started to take a firm root in the region. Unfortunately, the news about forestry was not always good in the middle of the century. With so much of the area's forests cut, many of the lumber mills had shut down. The forests of the South were at a low point, and the time for sensible forest management was at hand. Right after the Second World War, reforestation efforts began in earnest. Many returning soldiers entered forestry schools. Tree planting machinery and tree nurseries were put into heavy service. As southern forest lands regenerated, research helped rebuild the forest industry and create even more jobs. When researchers discovered a way to use southern pine to manufacture plywood, a new industry was created in the 1960s that resulted in the construction of 10 plywood plants in 3 years in Louisiana alone, a very unexpected development. In the half-century since reforestation really began, southern forests have indeed staged a dramatic comeback. Almost 50 years ago, we had 139 billion cubic feet of timber in the southern forest. In 1992, that volume had swelled to 252 billion cubic feet. That's almost double the volume of trees we had 50 years ago. And during that 50-year period, we continued to grow and harvest trees to make the many products that contribute so much to our happiness and well-being. In Louisiana alone, we plant more than 100 million new trees annually. That's at least 25 trees for each Louisiana citizen every year. What's more, trees can be grown over and over and over on the same site. You may also be surprised to discover all the wonderful things our forests give us. In addition to clean air and water, cool shade, a home for wildlife, and protection of our topsoil, the forest provides products such as your morning newspaper, books, school supplies like pencils and paper, even your toothpaste, along with many other fine products. That's the great thing about trees. They are the ultimate renewable resource. And with proper planning and dedicated concern, the South's forests will continue to grow and prosper for generations to come. We can truly have forests forever.